Hello, beautiful moms and entrepreneurs. My name is Charisse Walker, and I'm your host of the Unbreakable Mompreneurs podcast. This is a place where we come together to learn, grow, and inspire. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Hello, Unbreakable Mompreneurs. My name is Charisse Walker, your host. And do you have a problem making decisions? Sometimes you just don't know what to do, so you're in decision paralysis. Well, today's your day because Cheryl Einhorn is in the house and she's going to teach us how to be better decision makers and what to do. So, Cheryl, without further ado, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Hi, I'm Cheryl. Charisse, thank you so much for having me here. I am somebody who came to decision making in an unexpected way. My background is in investigative journalism. I spent over a decade at the business magazine Barron's, and I ended up writing stories that mostly took a skeptical look at companies' finances or at their strategy. They were called bearish company stories. And when the stories came out, there'd often be a large impact. Often because they were about publicly traded companies, the stock exchange would have to halt the shares from trading until an orderly order flow could be resumed. About a half a dozen companies went out of business. For one company, after a series of investigative articles, the CEO was sentenced to 10 years in jail. And although journalism really does celebrate truth to power, these stories sat a little bit uneasily for me because behind every story are people. People that work at these companies and want to be able to know that they've got a steady job. People who buy the products and services of the companies that I was asking questions about. And so I just started to think about, how do I know that I'm telling stories that are true, that should be told, that I'm questioning the evidence and the people who were willing to speak to me about those articles. And that led me to realize that there is no system out there that really thinks about all these assumptions and judgments that we make about the way that we move through the world, what we now call cognitive biases. And so with my background in research, I put together a system for problem solving that I now call the AREA method. It's an acronym for the steps of the process. And since that time, I've written 3 books about complex problem solving and decision making to help people with personal problems, professional problems, to help them think about the psychology of their own decision making, to help them make financial decisions. And then at the beginning of 2026, to help people using artificial intelligence with decisions.
That is amazing. Congratulations on all your success in your books, because I know what it's like to write a book. I'm doing the sequel to this one. And I think as entrepreneurs, sometimes it's like, I mean, there's different types of personalities, but you're a bull and you've made your decision, you're going to go gung-ho, nothing's going to get in your way. Like a bowling ball is kind of how I think, and the pins are getting knocked over to the point where the bowling ball is being held and you haven't let go because you don't know if it should be on this side or down the middle. And I think decision making is so important. And how do you help people who are in that paralysis where I don't know, like I know I'm supposed to do something, I know I'm called and this is what I like to do, but I don't know how to go about doing it, or I don't know if it, like for me, like I'm a realtor, I'm a lender, I'm an author, I'm a podcast host, and so we're all 1,000 hats. So how come it's so important to like make that decision and just take the first step and start going?
It's a terrific question. Decision making is important because that's how we get to the future, right? We have to choose that path forward. And even when we don't choose, that's a choice, right?
Yeah.
So what you were asking specifically about analysis paralysis,
Yeah.
my research shows there's 5 dominant ways that people approach decisions. And primarily one of those archetypes ends up in what you're calling analysis paralysis. And these are people that I refer to as the thinker. They are people for whom it is very important that they weigh their options. So they tend to have a relative and comparative focus between things. And they have a tough time because they sit in analysis, seeing the gray complexity between the options, right? They end up, therefore, with sort of unequal weightings and prioritization between things. And that can be helped in a couple different ways. One is at the outset of problem solving, having a very clear definition of the problem you're solving, right? Generally, people look at a problem, it's open-ended. That's very difficult because there's many possibilities. And somebody who's a thinker really wants to investigate those. And thinkers want to mitigate the downside. These are generally cautious and very careful decision makers. So they have a real loss aversion. They would rather prevent the downside than either have the best possible outcome or the best outcome possible. And so really clearly inverting the problem they're solving and turning it upside down to, instead of saying, what is it that I want, to actually saying, how will I know that the decision has succeeded for me? And identifying a vision of success takes open-ended problem solving and instead gets really clear on what has to happen in the outcome of the decision for you to know that it's been a success. Now, instead of having, let's say, 8, 9, 10 different variables that you could be matching up against each other, what are the 1, 2, maybe 3 things that if they don't work out in the solution, you deem that solution a failure? Well, now you've really narrowed down to 3 things that must happen. Well, you can investigate those 3 things, you can research them, you can analyze them, and you've now taken something, instead of being this really big open possibility, and at the very outset of problem solving, given you're something that is a very concrete pathway to be able to follow forward.
Such good advice. So what do you do for those people that, like, I've met several people that they're serial course takers and they go from one course to next course to next course, or maybe they take multiple at the same time. And so then they can't ever get their feet out from under them and like take the step. And the 4 years go by or 5 years go by and they haven't done anything. They have all this knowledge, but they haven't done anything. What do you say to the, like, what are they struggling with, those type of people?
Well, again, these are people who see many different options,
Right.
right? And there is another kind of problem solver among my problem solver profiles that you could be talking about, which I call the visionary. And this is somebody who doesn't see the potential or the practical, but they see the possibility,
Right.
right? They could be many different things. And so as they try to navigate forward and they're able to jump forward, they don't necessarily lay down all the details between here and there. So they're always reaching for an end goal, and that can feel like something that is constantly out of reach. And so for those people, they look for what is scarce or what is original when something that's workaday might be just fine. So if they can clearly understand what are some of the foundational pieces that they can lay down to get to that possibility, they don't have to feel like they need to keep leaping forward, and they can take more concrete steps in between. They often need help identifying those smaller movements, which don't always feel that satisfying to somebody who's got a really big picture of what could be in the future.
That's cool. So what about those that they are successful, but now they feel trapped because they're not enjoying it anymore and they don't know what to do? Is that similar steps that you take or no?
Well, you might be trapped for many different reasons, right? You might be trapped for a very good reason. You have a certain financial commitment and you're sitting there and you're doing something for actually a very important goal that meets other standards, right? And that could be about sort of recognizing why you're doing it. For other people, what they may just need to do is to identify, we were talking about a vision of success. Well, what would be successful for you? Is it a whole-scale career change? Is it a company that is more entrepreneurial and has fewer defined rules and regulations for how you move in a particular role? So somebody getting really clear on what those success metrics are is always a good first step to being able to help identify what are those few things that you want to be solving for that is going to help you feel like you're getting into action. And then I would say you don't need to take a whole scale change. You also can take just one step. Could you spend a day with somebody who's doing something that you think you could be interested in? And might you then be able to more slowly test that hypothesis out where you don't have to quit your job, but you're beginning to get into action to be able to test that path forward.
And that's the same type of person that wants to get into a new career that maybe they're at a W-2 and they want to become an entrepreneur, but they need to test it out, beta test it and see. I love that. Okay, so let's talk about your new book because AI is this huge thing right now. And so, how do you want to expand a little more about what your book is and why people
Sure.
should read it?
Sure. So the new book is titled The Human Edge, Smarter Decisions in the Age of AI.
Mhm.
And what it is meant to do is to give you sort of a user manual for how do you actually hold on to your critical thinking, to your judgment, to those facets of your decisions that are uniquely yours, and also harness the power of this very impressive technology tool.
So, and this has nothing to do with it. I'm not trying to get political, but this keeps coming through my head as you say that because I'm in Utah, right? And so the Charlie Kirk assassination. And I mean, if anybody has looked at anything online, they all are showing all these different analogies and theories on how Tyler Robinson was not the shooter, that it's all these other things, whether it be his lapel or a gunshot coming through. Like, it doesn't matter. There's like 500 different conspiracy theory type things that are going on. And so it's very easy in something like that for people to, like, oh my gosh, I saw that. That totally makes sense. And so that has to be it. And then they see some another theory and oh, that makes sense and that has to be it. So what's your recommendation to people? Because that's in any situation, right? It's literally in any situation that whatever we see on the media might not be true. And whatever we see, like you go to MSNBC or you go to CNN or you go to Fox, like there's so much different narrative and online, there's so many different things that it's just so AI can basically do anything and create any type of picture and analogy.
So
Oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
I think there's two things that you're talking about. We come to the world not as it is, but as we are,
Hmm.
right? And we have our assumptions and our judgments. We were talking about the cognitive biases, for example. And when we're working with AI, we come with all of those potentially unfounded assumptions and judgments because we see the world through this sort of dirty windshield of our own past experience.
Hmm.
AI has its own biases, right? It has its own limitations, which are all mechanistic, the
Hmm.
way that the algorithm was set up. As well, this idea that it wants to please you and it fabricates and can hallucinate information, which means you always have to check and challenge it. So when we work with AI, our biases don't go away. We're actually intersecting our assumptions and judgments with AI's assumptions and judgments. And so what we really need to do is to sort of lean into about three different ways to challenge the information that we're coming up against. One, we can ask it, what's the algorithm that gave you this? How did you determine that the information that you gave me was the information that you showed me? And it will give you its sources and you can check it. The second thing to do is to be able to check it with a second algorithm. If you use a different machine algorithm, so if you're using ChatGPT, might you be using Claude or Grok or something else? The different algorithms also give you different outputs. And then you can also check it with an expert or check it yourself outside of AI so that you have a way to really press up against its information. And you can also ask it, challenge me. What assumptions and judgments might I be coming with? If I am coming to the machine and I'm favoring a particular option or pathway, I'm going to be looking for it to say, Cheryl, that's exactly right. That's what you should do. But confirming something isn't as rigorous as looking for disconfirming data. So I could be asking it, how might I be wrong? Right? If I'm assuming that the information is true, what kind of unfounded assumptions and judgments could I have? So checking your own biases, you can do with AI, and you can check AI's biases, both with AI and offline.
I love that. And asterisk ChatGPT can make stuff up. So you need to,
Yes.
it's not
It,
all
it
fact.
really can, especially, I'll just give you an example. I was looking for a citation for something, and it gave me a citation from an author who I have respect for, whose work I've read. And I was so pleased with that.
Mhm.
And I was about to put it into the material that I was working on. And I thought, Cheryl, you have all this research that shows that this could fabricate. You should check it. And you know what? It was totally made up. Although it fit with the body of work of what I know of this particular scholar, it was a completely made up citation. So you really do have to check.
Yeah, that happened to me as well. And I'm glad that I did check.
Yeah.
And I love that you need to, I mean, making sure that you can corroborate it with multiple different sources
Yeah.
in multiple different ways is important. And I
Yeah.
think that's my message with what you have to say is you can't believe everything you see, hear, or read.
Yeah.
And so you need to be able to make that decision making on your own and come to a conclusion on your own, not from what you heard. Um,
Right.
And if it makes, like, I remember 9/11 that you heard something like the day of, because I had to teach a class, and they were talking about how this guy surfs the debris down and he was able to survive. Like, how is that even possible? But people were saying so many different things. So making sure it makes sense. I love that importance. So kind of a change in subject for a minute, because this is about mompreneurs. And so as a mom, what would be your advice to your children, especially in today's world where that's all they know is AI, like that they're growing up with that? What would be your advice with your children on how to use it?
Yeah. So my advice to everybody is do your own thinking first,
Okay.
because your critical thinking skills, they're muscles.
Mhm.
And if you don't use them, they're going to atrophy. And it's very easy to open up one of these chat windows and ask something that you want to be able to puzzle through on your own. There are going to be times where you're not using AI or you're talking with another human being, and you want to be able to know that you have those thinking skills, because your decisions are the only thing you actually control.
Mhm.
So you don't want to turn that over to anybody.
I like that. Great advice. Okay, so if you were sitting on a park bench and this 9-month pregnant woman comes and sits next to you, and like her first child, what would be your advice to that mom? And it could be not just as a new mom, but any part of what you've learned as being a mom. What would be your advice?
It's all going to work out, is my very first piece of advice, right? There's no idea of perfect.
Yeah.
And even when you make a good decision in one moment, wait a few minutes. That same decision won't necessarily work out, and that's okay too. And I think there's a couple things I think I've really learned. One is it's really important to be present
Mhm.
with another person. And that's certainly true with your children,
Yeah.
right? Because there's a lot more going on in a conversation than just what somebody's saying. There's how they're feeling, how they're receiving the information. And I would also say that one kid is not like another. So what works with one child isn't going to work with the other one. And it gives you a chance to constantly learn in real time.
Mhm.
So not rushing, I think, is also important,
Mhm.
because if you're rushing, you're missing things. But as long as the child, and I think this is true with anybody who you love, if they really get a sense that you are there for them and you support them, and that they just have love that's not going to go away, there's an awful lot of leeway to make mistakes, and there will be mistakes, and you can collect those as your own data set of things to learn from.
I want to go back when you said the only thing you have control over are your decisions, and AKA free agency, right? And I think that as parents, we try to take that free agency away from our kids. And sometimes they have to be able to make those decisions on their own so that they can learn from them. And it's hard because, especially, it's hard parenting adult kids because they make decisions. You're like, I wouldn't do that because you either seen it or you've done it, and you're like, bad decisions. You're not going to like that. But making sure that our children realize that they have the ability to mess up, especially if they're still in the house, and that they can correct those things. I love that you talk about making sure that they know you love them so that they can have the leeway they need to be able to make those decisions, good or bad.
Yeah, I also think there's a really interesting lesson that I've certainly learned the hard way in parenting, which is it doesn't work to have a lot of rules. Like, what are your absolute hard and fast rules? Because it's hard to toe the line, right? It's hard to toe the line. So to figure out, like, what are maybe the 3 or maybe 5 things that you really care about that have to be done a certain way. Maybe it's no drinking and driving, whatever those few things are. And then the other things really have to slide, because if you have too many rules, they don't know what to listen to.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for us as well. If you put a lot of rules, which one should I pay attention to? So figuring out what the big things are that you really care about, and those you got to hold hard and fast to. And the rest are mistakes they can make.
What are your non-negotiables, basically?
Right.
Yeah.
What are your non-negotiables?
Because I remember growing up, my parents, I lived in Bakersfield. I grew up in Bakersfield, California, and my parents, we weren't allowed to wear shorts during the winter, right? Well, so what? If I'm cold, let me make that decision. And so as a parent, making sure that's great advice that you have. So thank you.
I think the other thing that I would really say that is based on the work that I do is talk to your children about decision making, and share with them what are the steps that you want to go through when you're solving a complex or high stakes problem. And the reason why I say that is it's not something we generally teach at home in a really clear way, but it's a lifelong gift that you can give them, because you can't control the outcome, just as we're talking about, but you can control the process. That's up to you.
Good advice. Well, if our listeners wanted to learn more about you or find you, or even buy your books, how would they do that?
Well, you can find me at areamethod.com, AREA method.com. And I hope that you will connect with me, Cheryl Strauss Einhorn, on LinkedIn. I have a newsletter there, and I would love to have an opportunity to connect with people and to share my books and work and help you make your big decisions better.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for being on.
Thank you so much for having me.
And Unbreakable Moms, lots of good information, always good information, golden nuggets. That decision making is something you have control over, only you. And so don't let anybody else affect that. You get to decide. And so go out and make it a great day. Beautiful moms, remember, you are unbreakable. Keep illuminating the world with your strength, pursuing your dreams, and reveling in the splendor of motherhood. This is Charisse Walker, bidding you farewell for now. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations on the next episode of the Unbreakable Mompreneurs podcast. Until then, keep shining bright. Signing off with love, Charisse Walker.